Good morning, Ayin Beis, volume 3, bottom of page 1443. Sum up what we learned in previous class. Really the conclusion of a subsection in Ayin Beis, and that is speaking about the yichud, the mitzvah, our avodah of unifying, connecting existence with the divine, with godliness. And specifically earlier we spoke about liyachid kudshe bricha v'shchinta, which every mitzvah accomplishes, is to unite the divine transcendent beyond kudshe bricha with the divine that manifests within existence, shchinta. All the mitzvahs do that, and in general terms, all-encompassing Krishma achieves that, because Krishma is klolos kol mitzvahs. That's why in Shema you have in Krishma you have 248 words, which correspond to the 248 positive mitzvahs, correspond to the 248 limbs, evarim da malka kaddish, because through the mitzvahs and through Krishma. And Krishma also accomplishes and allows, Krishma helps be mamshech this through all the mitzvahs. You draw this energy both from the top, bottom up, halah, and same thing, hamshacha, all the way to and from Atzmus Ein Sof itself, Gufa de Malka, Kudshe Brichu, the highest levels, and Neshomos Yisrael particularly have this power because Neshomos Yisrael are rooted there. That's why through their avodah to connect to that. So essentially, Neshomos Yisrael are the players that activate this process from the highest levels down to the lowest levels, from the lowest to the highest. In the context of this discussion, he was speaking about how this yichud, these highest levels of yichud, apply when we talk about Olam Hazeh in this world. We experience the Ein Hareich, the infinite apartness of the divine Atzmus. Whereas through Oyer, on its own, you'd only know about the divine as a source of revelation. But through the Nivraim, through Olam Hazeh, we come to also appreciate that Oyer is also in a bitl of Ein Oyer. Except today, Oyer doesn't feel it. The Asiyah of the Oyer will feel it as well. Like he said, the efsher that the oir, like the nefesh, will receive from the guf, the oir will receive from the yesh, basically, which is that so therefore then like he said, the guf will be a guf ye ein sof, meaning it'll have revealed and conscious feeling of the divine. Today, the guf only has the etzem in it, but it's not revealed or conscious, and the nefesh will be in a state of bitl of einoid. Okay. So that concludes the section Kol HaMayrich Be'echad. If you recall, the elaborating on the contemplation and on the experience of Echad, of Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, which is uniting existence with the divine. So he's explained it now. They said through the whole process of all Seder Ishtalshelus, through Kudshe Brichu and Shchinta. Okay. So I shall continue now, bottom of page 1443, and the journey continues. Going to go back now to the beginning of this discussion, where if you recall that Neshomos Yisrael have two levels. The level as they are in their root, which is all the way in the etzem, and the way the neshama comes down below, and there the neshama requires the support of the malachim and of the Einei Ha'eda, of the siyua, of a light outside of itself, to illuminate and guide the neshamas down below. But now that we've established that Neshomas reach all the way to this highest level, so the Rebbe Rashab is going to go back and ask the question, so then what's the role of Malachim? So it's a back and forth discussion, which began, just to give you the context, on page 1434. He spoke about Neshomos l'mayla harbe malachim. Okay. On top of that page, he was speaking about Avedus Adam is Gerim the Aliyah. The Aved of a person is the one that triggers and generates all this energy, and because it's higher than Malachim. And yet, going back even before that, we began about Malachim was on page 1425.
I have to give listener. Hello? I have to give listener.
1425, where he said that Hagamshen is bar the Yisrael and Pchinas Ishanein l'mayla harbem malachim. So actually, let me go back even further. On page 1408, actually, was where he began to speak about the angels, malachim. Where he first spoke about the Neshamas being like the pupil of the eye. So that's when he began to explain the difference between the Riyah, the Einayim. The Malachim are God's so-called supervisors, God's distributors in Ishtalshlus. That's why they're called Einei Hashem. But the Neshamas are called Ishen Einai, the pupil of the eye. That he began on page 1408. Spoke at length there about the difference between Neshamas and Malachim. Then he went back and said, on page 1425, so even though the Yisrael are called the pupil of the eye, and it's much higher than Malachim, which are called Einei Hashem, and the Neshamas Yisrael receive from them. And what's the mile of Malachim? He started explaining that B'nai Mayim, the gut, the stomach, the intestines, the innards, the digestive system, the cosmic digestive system that processes, elevates, and draws into and breaks down, like the digestive system physically, the Amshach is the food, breaks it into the nutrients. So he explained at length how Malachim serve that role. So basically, Malachim's role that helps the Neshamas is in Ishtalshlus, in order to draw it into and integrate and internalize into existence. But Neshamas Yisrael on their own are higher than that. So we've already learned both sides of the coin, so to speak, the two levels of Neshamas. But nevertheless, now that we've established that Neshamas reached all the way into that, and the Rebbe Rashab is going back again to elaborate now. So then why then do we need the Malachim? So the truth is, he answered that question, but he's going to speak about it more in detail now. Just to make sure that the context is clear, that's the context of the pages, as I said, starting from 1408, 1425, then on page 1434, these are the coordinates of this topic, 1434. And then now we're going back 1443. So if you look at all those pages I just mentioned, those 4 pages, you'll see how he goes back and forth. Neshamas are higher than with the brawl of Malachim, and yet Neshamas are still higher. And now back to Malachim. So here's what he says. Achine yesh lahavin. Bottom of page 1443. I definitely recommend looking at the page I just said if you want to really get some like the sense of navigation of the material here. So the bottom of page 1443, the pages can be found if you want to follow the text at ayinbeis.com. However, we need to understand being that through Krishma, in Krishma, the general souls of Israel, reach the Sachad, the Gufa, the Malka reach the level of the Sachad, which means l'shtaba, to unite, to join, to cleave. The Gufa, the Malka, the very Gufa of the Melech, not just the Gilui, that's higher than Gilui, Mamish, the Gufa, the Malka, Mamish, So then, lo mitzrichim Yisrael lekabel ava v'yira ma'malachim. So why do they have to receive ava v'yira from the malachim? K'moy begedushas Yotzer shalifnei krishma. Like when we say kedushas Yotzer, before we say krishma, we say Yotzer. You talk about the malachim. Why? Because the malachim are the ones that are mamshich to us, the ava v'yira. If you remember, hamu meyai rachem arachmenu, that the compassion that's much higher than existence and beyond existence, since it's Ein Sof, it needs to be channeled into existence. So the Neshomos Yisrael, we just said, reach all the way into the guf of the Malchim. So why do they need the Malachim to receive Ava V'yira from Malachim? As was explained on page 1434, I just referred to. So on 1434, that's where he spoke about why we say Yotzer. Yeah. Yes. K'dei la'er shefa ava yirish malachim the Neshomos Yisrael. Hare malachim, continuing the question, isn't it a fact that the malachim eina mekablim rak b'chinas dibur belvad? Canal. We learned earlier that the malachim only receive from the level of dibur, God's speech, not God's thought. Remember the zivug neshikin and the zivug gufni? So it's more from God's speech canal. So the malachim are therefore a lower dimension than the Neshomos. So why do the Neshomos need the malachim for the ava v'yira? So the obvious answer is because the Neshomos are down and below, like we've been discussing. But clearly the Alter Rebbe Rashab wants to explain this in a fuller sense of the word, in a fuller sense, much more than what he said earlier. But that's what he did say earlier. So it's not like this topic was not addressed. It's not like a completely new topic. But as I said, it's a constant back and forth because we're talking about reaching the highest levels and drawing them down into existence. And that's what this next section is going to be about, how the Neshom, how with the process of how it works down below. We've learned how it works above, that the Neshomas, through saying Krishma, are able to reach all the way to Kutsha Brichu on all the levels. Zah, Chachma Bina, Chachma, Keser, Arich, Atik, Ak, and all the way before the Tzimtzum, all the way to Shmaya Atzmi, as we've learned. But now he's going back to draw it down because remember, in the interface, we want to have that divine unity down below as well. So though Krishma does it, but the Malachim, as we're going to learn, support and help the process, like the digestive system again. The digestive system is not the core of the human being, but it's a necessary process to internalize and integrate and distribute the nutrients that are drawn from the food that we consume. So that's the question on the table now. We turn the page 1444. Now he starts to answer. Acha inyan hu, however, the inyan in this is the answer to the question. Like I said many times, the Chassidus doesn't say question answer, it says ha'inyan hu. It's always about understanding the subject matter. You understand the broader context of the subject of the inyan, then the male of the questions get answered. That's just a Chassidus you see everywhere. Always bira inyan, acha inyan. It's more than just shaila tshuva, question answer. It's understanding the topic in a more comprehensive way. So what's the inyan? The Neshomos Yisrael had a milubashim begufim, gashmi. Souls of Israel, they manifest and enclose themselves and are enclosed in physical bodies. And a neshama down below is not just hovering around, it's manifest within the physical bodies. Shesharsham nimshach meneged Asiyah. Where's the body getting its very existence? We're not talking now the etzem of the yesh that comes from Mitzusim Atzmusa. We're talking now the physicality of it. Its limitations, its immortal and defined parameters and all of that, and its very physicality. The root of the bodies comes from Neiga Asiyah. So let's explain. Every level has to be defined here very specifically. The word noiga literally means to shine. It means like.
Did you mean the root of the soul, or the root? You said the root of the body. Did you mean the root of the soul?
The root of the body.
Oh, okay.
Root of the body.
Apologies.
Where's the root of the body? The very physicality of the body. So, like everything in physical, the physical comes from noiga of Asiyah. So I'm going to explain what that means. So the word noiga is short for klipas noiga. So we know that Tanya explains, and from Eis Chaim, there's two types of klipas. Shalosh klipas atmeis, the three impure shells or husks, where there the divine spark is so concealed, trapped. You can't. That's why it's asur b'derech hitzenim. It's bound and being like held hostage. It's in prison, and it's off limits. Klipas noiga, he explains, is a second level of klipa, which is not quite like that. It's still a klipa, meaning it's a husk, a shell, but noiga, transparent. Noiga comes from the word like light. Light gets through it. For example, the difference between a peel like a grape or the peel of a grape is probably the best example, a very thin membrane. So you could see the fruit inside. Some of it is seen. Just giving a physical example. By contrast, for example, the peel of a nut, a shell of a nut, especially a coconut, for example, is absolutely covers and conceals everything that's inside. So in klippas itself, the husks itself, there are levels. They're thick husks that completely enclose, completely encompass the fruit within, which is like the spark. And there are klippas that are klippas nega, which means that some of the light, the divine, is shining through. It's still a klippa, and like he says, that all the things that are dvarim asurim, all prohibited items, everything prohibited in the Torah, shalosh klippas atmeis. Dvarim mutarim, let's say kosher food, kosher travel, anything that is not forbidden, that's allowed, but it's physical. And therefore, it could be used, you could indulge in it. And for the time period when you do, temporarily, it descends into the negative klippa. But you could also use it for Kedusha. You can eat l'shem shamayim with a bracha, a proper meal, and you're eating to get the strength to be able to daven and to learn and to do mitzvahs and to do kindness. So then the klippas nega is elevated to Kedusha. On its own, it's neutral. So this nega is a short word. When we speak nega, we mean klipas nega. So nega itself, we know, goes through levels. In Atzilus lo yigur chara. Atzilus is Eris and Kalim divine, their godliness. Generally speaking, we don't speak about klipa and Atzilus, even though there is a subtle form, but that's not relevant to our discussion. Klipa begins to emerge in Bria. Once you create, and therefore the divine consciousness that's present in Atzilus has now been concealed behind the parsa, the partition, and Malchus has descended into Bria, and then Bia. That's where the klippa, the container, begins to become more dominant. In other words, higher than Bria, the klippa knows its only purpose is to protect. The keli is there to be mamshech. But what happens when the keli becomes an identity of its own? So in Bria, it's still very subtle, but it already has an identity. In Yetzirah, the klippa becomes more prominent, and in Asiyah, neged Asiyah, is where the klippa now has become even more dominant, which will allow for the creation of the body and, frankly, all physical things in this world. So their physicality, we're talking about now, the fact that they are the crassness and the coarseness of their physicality, that is coming through the shtalshlus from world after world and rooted ultimately in nimshach. It's nimshach shesharsham. The root of these bodies are rooted in nega of Asiyah. So what we discussed earlier, that the guf has a koyach ha'atzmus in it, which is mitzvah asmusay, that's not the guf on its own. That's because atzmus said, I'm creating something that has a taste of my Mitzusa Matzmuse that it feels self-contained and it doesn't feel like anything created it. And that gives us some awareness of that level of Atmos. But that's not what he's talking. Now he's talking about the mere fact. In Atzilus, you don't have Gashmis. For that matter, in Bria, you don't have Gashmis. So physicality and everything that comes with it has to be a way that the divine has been concealed to allow for a physical world like ours to exist. Like we learned earlier, at many tzimtzum, Asiyah is the lowest of all the worlds. And Asiyah Gashmis, Achumis, is the lowest of the lowest. So Tachtenim, how does Tachtenim work? It's the Kalim begin to take on more and more presence. And now in this world, the challenge is the other way around. Is to find the oil within the Keli, or to find the fruit within the Klippa. That's our Avodah. When we do our mitzvahs, when we do our Avodah, we're basically Avodah Sabirunim, we're separating the nutrients from the husks, basically. Klippa, the peri, the pri from the Klippa. We're taking out the fruit from its shell and elevating it. That's called elevating the divine sparks. And through that, we transform this material world. But how does the material world itself? So this we learned also earlier in volume 2 about the parsois. It comes through many concealments, and the concealments are called nega in this context, like klipas nega from Asiyah. Now, where does the klipas nega of Asiyah come from? Shemakablim Mahamerkavah de pnei aryeh u pnei nesher. And that in turn comes from the Merkavah. The Merkavah we know is the chariot that consists of four faces, 4 dimensions, 4 directions. Pnei aryeh, the face of a lion. Pnei nesher, the face of an eagle. Pnei sheir, face of an ox, of a bull. And pnei adam, the face of a man. So the way Kabbalah Chassidus explain it is the Seder Shtalshalus that we've been learning about Eris and Kalim, that's on higher levels. Once you go into Bria, it starts taking on the shape. Even in higher levels, we know the shape of Adam Elyon. We talked about Adam the Bria, Adam the Yetzirah, Adam the Asiyah. But then it starts taking on shapes that are becoming the beginnings, the spiritual roots of everything that exists in this material world. And in general, what he's saying here is that the Asiyah Denega is coming from Merkavah Pnei Aryeh Pnei Nesher, Kiyadua, as it's known. The Sheidish Chayas Sa'ifus, who Pnei Nesher, that the root of the life, of the vitality of the birds in this world, come from the Pnei Nesher, from the face of the eagle in the spiritual world, Sheba Merkavah, in the chariot. The Sheidish Chayas, the Chayas, and the root of the vitality of the animals of this world is Mepnei Aryeh Sheba Merkavah. It's from the face of the lion in the chariot. The Sheidish Chayes HaBehemis, and behemoths are the cattle. Mibchinas Pnei Sheir. That comes from Pnei Sheir, from the face of the ox, because Nesher is like the king of the birds. The Aryeh is the melech of the animals, the king of the animals, and Sheir is like the king of the behemoth, the cattle. So everything in this world, if you recall when he spoke about even a blade of grass a while back, even a blade of grass comes from the divine, because the way the divine works is the divine energy manifests in channels, and these channels ultimately diffuse and direct the energy each into its particular part of this world. Ein Sof itself, we all know, is completely seamless and shapeless. The Kalim, even though they do create identity, but those are the attributes. Chachma, Bina, Das, Chesed, Gur, Teferes, Netzach, Chod, Yesod, Malchus. So it's divine attributes, Eris and Kalim. The energies in the Kalim. But when it comes into Bria, that's when we start talking about the language of a Merkavah. A Merkavah is a structure that now is not just Eris and Kalim, is the beginnings, the archetypes that will ultimately be the root of all the existing creatures in this world. So he's covered 3. Then he goes on and says, "V'hinei nefesh habamis Shebegufim agashmim. Let me just finish this piece and I'll stop if anybody wants to ask anything. Now, the animal soul within the physical bodies in which this neshama resides, descends down below. It encompasses of all the three levels we just mentioned. Pnei Aryeh, Pnei Sher, Pnei Nesher. Because the nefesh habamis means the animal soul, so even though behema, but the truth is it has all dimensions in it. Yesh b'nefesh habamis mebchinas behema. In the animal soul, you have from the behema, from the cow, umebchinas chaya, from the level of chaya, the animals, umebchinas eif, and from the level of the bird. Okay, so we're still in the middle of this. He's going to explain this more, but let me just tell you where this is going, and then I'll stop if anybody wants to ask anything, then I'll continue reading. Even though I prefer to read on, because it's a whole subject, but let me just explain where he's going with this. What he's coming to explain here is basically that yes, neshamas are rooted in a very high place, but neshama has to come down to this world and engage with this world. And when neshama comes down below, it doesn't behave like an angel. It's not like a spiritual entity hovering around on this earth. It manifests in a body in the fullest sense of the word. We're sitting here learning. It's a neshama and a guf. And the guf isn't just a sideshow. The body is the way that the soul is the vehicle of the soul. So in order to create the yichud that we're looking for, to reach the highest levels, you can't ignore that. Because the whole purpose is to create the yichud in this world. The neshamas above, you could say, already feel united. Here is to elevate the consciousness of this world and the tachtenim. So what is being explaining now is the process, the dynamics, or you could say even the mechanics of how a body comes into being, and including the animal soul, is that it goes through this process that he's describing now, that goes from the Asiyah, the nega, which is rooted in these different structures, in these different animals in the higher worlds. And therefore, if you want to achieve Ava V'yira down below, you have to find a way to engage with the body and its and the so-called the building blocks of the body, and the building blocks, the DNA of the body, and that's how the malachim come into play. Because the malachim, their role is in Bri, Yotzer, and Asiyah to help, like we learned earlier, process Aviyah in a way that it can manifest in this physical world. So that's where he's going with all of this. So it's true, he's right away entered into a zone here, which maybe some of you may have learned this idea, is maybe not. I'll try to elaborate. But basically what he's referring to here is something that is taught, is explained elsewhere at length. Here the Rebbe Rashab, as I pointed out, this is already volume 3 of Ayin Beis, but he thinks he assumes we've already learned elsewhere, so we don't need to go begin from scratch. But he's basically calling upon here the dynamics of how is Olam Asiyah and all the physical matters in this world, this specifically Neshamas and Gufim, the Gufim, how they come to be. And he's describing it in this process of the Merkavah. So he said that so far the Nefesh Habamis includes all levels. But we can read on, or I can stop if anybody wants to ask anything. Your call. I'm fine with questions.
Well, a question clearly comes to mind. What about the fish, and what about Shratzim and all the others? Where are they coming if they're not from these three animals? So
the answer is, here I'll tell you right now, I'll cut you right off. It's not the theme of Ayin Beis. If you really want to know, I would advise to go to Sefer Likutim and look up this subject, and it's discussed in many places. Remember, the Rebbe Rashab is not coming to cover now where all the animals come from. He's coming to explain why we need malachim when a neshama is in a higher root than malachim. So he's really coming to explain the gufim of the physical bodies. But it's a good question you're asking, and it's discussed in other places.
Okay, so in this context, we don't have a connection to fish, dogim, right? There's no connection
Who
to our
says we
nefesh
don't have?
Bahamas.
It's not relevant to this conversation here.
Oh,
That's what
okay.
I.
No, I'm just saying the nefesh Bahamas.
Oh no, you can't
Yeah,
assume anything.
no,
Just
okay.
because he doesn't bring the whole picture doesn't mean we have no connection. It's not. He's not coming to discuss our connection with
Ayin Beis.
the fish and so on.
Okay. The
You
final
can imagine
one.
they're included as well. Obviously, they come from somewhere, right?
Right. And then you're saying the Merkavah is in Bria, not in Atzilus? The vision of Cheskia,
Well, generally it's in Bria or Yetzira. Yeah.
all right. Thank you.
I will just say one thing for the record. Fish and anything that lives in water is coming from Alma Discasia, the hidden worlds. Here he's talking about Alma Disgaea, the revealed worlds, the things that live on land. So just for the record. So they have their own root, but it's coming from the hidden worlds.
Rabbi, I have a question. And we can talk about it after you turn off the recording, if it's or not at all. It's way off the reservation, but it just jumps to mind. I can't stop thinking about it. Even though there's not a lot said here, it's very brief, which is why I hesitate to even ask the question. Someone comes and reads this. I mean, just at face value, literally, might say, "Well, this is not a bad proof for Darwinism, for that the origins of the human body." And I didn't say the human soul, but the human body is essentially from the animal kingdom, and the evolution of the human species as an animal, not as a godly being, derives from the animal kingdom. How do you say, well, that's just here's a the wisest rabbi, one of the wisest rabbis, saying just that the source of the human body is coming from the animal kingdom.
Well, first of all, he's not talking about the animal kingdom. He's talking about the spiritual archetypes in the Merkavah. He doesn't say here that the soul, the body comes from a cow or a lion or an eagle. That's number one. Secondly, that's fine. We do have a relationship. We have daimim shemeach chai medaber. We have within ourselves. We do have dimensions of other species. That's not an issue at all. God created everything, but the question is whether we actually evolved from a species before this. That's the bigger question. I understand we're not talking about the soul now. The body, I mean, from the Torah's perspective, the Torah says God created the human being in the divine image. There are some that do say that the Offer min Adama that he took, the earth, in which he placed the body, the soul rather, he took the earth. Some say that, why can't you say that was that was the human before it became human, like more of an animal form? There are some people who interpret that way. I don't know if the Rebbe would go with that. But the concept that we have a relationship, there's no problem with that at all. As a matter of fact, so whole Seder Shtalshus means evolution. We evolve from Bria to Yetzira to Asiyah. So that sense, correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, let's read on because it's a whole subject here. So I'll say like this. In the parentheses, he's going to explain what that means. Yesh leimer, these are the emotional attributes, the emotional faculties in the person. Shagam nefesh habamis yesh bei kol hamidas. Also, the animal soul has all the midas. So, in other words, what he's saying, these three levels are three types of different midas. The zeu sha'odam kailo kama pu'ula shenis. That's what we find. The Rambam writes. He says, "Kamashkosa b'ches prokim la Rambam." The Rambam has an essay called Shmeina Prokim la Rambam. It's printed in the Gemara, Masechta Avos. So he talks about the difference between a human being and an animal. Animals have one feature, like a dove is gentle, a raven is aggressive. And in human beings, we have a combination of many different. We can be compassionate and also aggressive. In animals, you don't have the mix. So he says, "Adam kail kamapul shenis." a person encompasses a number of different functions. Like it says in the Rambam writes in his 8 chapters, it's called the Shmeina Prakim, the 8 chapters of the Rambam. It's an essay called Shmeina Prakim, 7 chapters. Shazel Gam B'Nefesh HaTivi. That so too is it in the Nefesh HaTivi, in the natural soul, like meaning not just in the divine soul, the natural soul, that it has a number of features, like we see. Even though there may be a dominant personality type, a dominant characteristic, but we can have several characteristics and they work together. Or they conflict each other. Says to look and look at the Torah, the Mayim Kisavoy, Pasha Sam, that's in Pasha Shlach. Ulefizet Sarach Leimer. And according to this, we must say, Shagam B'Nefesh Abamish, that also in the animal soul, Yeshrisin ala Malachim. That even the animal soul has an advantage over the angels, B'Zeh Sheyesh B'Kol HaMidas. Because the Nefesh Abamis has all the midas. The Malachim, like Malach Machal, is Chesed. Malach Gavriel is Gvura. Malach Rafal is Teferes. So Malachim are known, as we know, Malach gets only one shlichus. When Malachim are sent as a shliach, they only come with one shliach each, because they are in one kav. A neshama, and here he says even a nefesh abamis, has multi-purpose. It's multifaceted. That's why the 3 angels that came to Avram, why couldn't one angel come and do all 3 things? Both give the sort of the good news that Yotzer is going to have a child, destroy Sodom, save light, because every malach has one shlichus. Just to give an example, the Rebbe spoke about this, a beautiful sikha about chess in Tafshin Ches in 1948. I prepared it. I had to do a lot of research. There was a chess master who came to Farbrengen. He was a frum Jew. And the Rebbe would often talk about things that people were doing that came to Farbrengen. And so the Rebbe spoke a whole sikha, a whole talk about the Avodas Hashem, the Arouse from chess. So he said that, he brings from the Kutei Torah there, that the king is, of course, the Eibishter, Melech Malcham Lachem HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The queen is Knesset Yisrael, the Neshomos. The pawns are the simple foot soldiers, one step at a time. And the ministers, which we know, the rook, the bishop, and the horse, the knight, are the knight, the rook, the knight, and the horse, they are.
It is the horse. You mean the rook, the knight, and the bishop? Because the knight is
the horse. The knight is the horse. No, the knight. What is it?
Yeah, the knight's the horse.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, the rook, the knight, and the bishop. Right. That these are the 3 levels of Bri, Yitzir, Asiyah, different angels. And what an angel, on one hand, they can move a lot more than a pawn, but they can only move in one path, either diagonally or straight, or 2 steps and 1 step. So they're always in their own kav, because malachim, each one has their kav, 1 midah each. But in that midah, they're powerful. On a soul down below, the pawn can only move 1 step at a time, except the first time it can move 2 steps. But a pawn through Avodas Hashem, Eishes Chayil Ateres Baila, when it reaches the other side and reaches the other side, it can become a queen. I don't want to go into all the details there. The point I want to make is that Malachim have their own kaf. So he's saying here that based on what we just said, that the Nefesh Abamis encompasses all 3, Pnei Aryeh, Pnei Nesher, Pnei Nesher, Pnei Asher, that the Nefesh Abamis encompasses all 3. In that sense, even the Nefesh Abamis has an advantage over Malachim because it's multifaceted. Okay. Ela Shehema Klulim, to continue. So yes, the animal soul encompasses all these 3 faces, or these 3 entities, these 3 archetypes, I should say. Ela Shehema Klulim, but Ruchni is the Nefesh HaMaskelis. But in the Nefesh HaBat, but they are encompassed in a spiritual sense, in the nefesh hamaskelis, in the nefesh habamis itself, I assume he means to say, because he says it's because let me just read this again. They're encompassed in the nefesh hamaskelis. So he bring here a few things. He said nefesh TV, he brought nefesh habamis, nefesh hamaskelis. Nefesh hamaskelis refers to the intellectual soul, the nefesh that contemplates, not nefesh, the divine soul. In Tanya, he only talks about two souls, nefesh alakis and nefesh habamis, the divine soul and the animal soul, sometimes called nefesh hativis, natural soul. In other places, in the Kutatei, other places he brings, there's a third soul called nefesh hasichlis. Here he calls it nefesh hamaskelis. It's something in between, because it is seichel. Nefesh habamis is primarily midas. It has seichel, but it also is primarily impulsive emotions, as he explains in Tanya. That's why it resides on the left side of the heart. Nefesh hamaskelis is more of a neutral. It's a more of a neutral dimension. And he says it's included in the ruchnis of nefesh hamaskelis. Kishedesh nefesh ha'adam. Because the root of the nefesh ha'adam is even though it encompasses the other three, but the root of nefesh ha'adam is not from pnei nesher, pnei aryeh, pnei sheir, whom mebchinas pnei adam shebe-merkavah. That's the fourth phase, the pnei adam. A human being comes from the pnei adam, shebe-merkavah da Asiyah, from the merkavah of Asiyah, shekel el hakel. That pnei adam encompasses all four, like the pasuk says in Yecheskel, k'meshakosov pnei adam l'arba asak. After saying that there are four faces, he says each one of them also has the face of a human. So it's like a combination of a human and a lion, a human and a eagle, and a human and a sher, and an ox. Because the pnei adam is really the all-encompasser. So what he's saying here is like this: the nefesh habamis, which is within the guf, that is encompasses the first three. But the nefesh ha'adam, which is the whole soul, including the nefesh hamaskelis, and I'm assuming also the nefesh hasichlis, that's a nefesh ha'alakis. He doesn't say it explicitly. That encompasses another dimension that animals don't have. That's pnei adam. And the pnei adam also encompasses the others. So in other words, we have in us something that's more adam, which is more divine, you can say, but we also have the nefesh habamis. We also have the three levels of the midas that he describes: the pnei aryeh, the lion, the nesher, and the eagle, and the ox. Yeah. So what's the bottom line, briefly, is that the body that the soul enters is made up of components, and it's a personality. So it's not just about loving God and uniting l'ashtaba begufa de malka, connecting to the etzem of the divine. We have to contend with a body and an animal soul, and it's all the soul is and the divine soul is manifest within it all. So if you were to disregard the body, it's one thing, but if you want to have that the neshama big guf, and now we described that the guf is made up of all these levels, so there we need something that helps the neshama achieve this level of ava v'yira. And that's what he concludes now and says, "Ulezeh hatam," and for this reason, tzarech ha'adam lahamshech al nafshei habamis, a person has to draw down on his animal soul, m'sheirush u'mekeir chetzva b'merkavah d'asiyah, pnei aryeh pnei nesher. If he's going to transform the animal soul, he has to speak to it, and so therefore he has to draw down from this root of its chiseling. Where did the nefesh habamis rooted in? In the merkavah of Asiyah, pnei aryeh pnei nesher, chulu. Shehein hamalachim d'Asiyah, and here he's explaining that the merkavah is connected to the malachim. These are the angels of Asiyah, hamashpiim ava v'yira, the ones that are mashpia and carry the ava v'yira. In other words, they are the gatekeepers. So if you were just dealing with a neshama, pure neshama, no body, no nefesh habamis, that's one thing. But that's not the case. The neshama comes into a body, because that's the whole point. Dira b'tachtenim. And once it's coming into a body, the gatekeepers, so to speak, or the way where everything, the functionality of the animal soul is rooted. He said the Noiga of Asiyah, which in turn receives from the Merkavah. The Merkavah is essentially a level of the angels that are in these shapes and forms. So therefore, that's why the person needs to draw from there. V'hu, ha'esh shel ma'ila shenimshach al nefesh habamis. This is the divine fire from above that is drawn and extends on the animal soul. Like it writes about this in Samach Vav. Ki hanefesh habamis on its own, the animal soul, ma'keves, umena'as es hanefesh alikis, lias le'ispailis ha'ava. Because the animal soul, it's an obstacle, it impedes and stops and blocks the divine soul from having the excitement of a stimulation of love. In order to get by, the animal soul has all its methods that it blocking that love to enter and to manifest in the divine soul. So you have to first awaken the love and reverence from its root. How do you get the nefesh habamis to cooperate? It's not going to respond to a soul because it has its own agenda. So what you have to do is invoke or trigger from the root. Where did the animal soul come from? And get going from there. And that's why the advice proffered upon us from the Anshe Knesset Agdela, from the great assembly, these are the sages that established the tefillas, the prayers, to say Birchas Yotzer. Who designated that we say Yotzer about the Malachim, Kodesh, 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 and all the Echayas, Vefani HaKedesh, Sha'imrim, Lu Mosam, Bekachim Ve'emrim, Kodesh, 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 all those expressions. Who established those prayers there? So these are two blessings that we say, Lefaneh, meaning before Shema, Lahasker Kedusha Samalachim, to invoke and to mention the Kedusha, the uttering of Kodesh of the Malachim. That when we say that, that creates Hazoza Primis, internal shakeup, an internal shift. Hazoza means like almost a shock, internal shift. Benefesh habamis in the animal soul, because you're going to the root of the animal soul, and by mentioning the kedusha, the kodesh that the malachim say, that in turn affects the animal soul. That's the in that we learned. The commission is barleel. We learned earlier. The hakikim mibefnim means a chiseling, an engraving. If you want to touch someone deeply, you have to go into something that they would respond to. What would the animal respond to? Respond to something in its own source. So when you're invoking the malachim, which is the root of the animal soul, you in turn are creating hazaza primis, an internal shake or shift, that in turn it creates an engraving. It makes an impression on the animal soul. And once you've done that, then afterwards, b'krishma, when you come to Krishma, tuchel hanefesh al-kis li'ishtaba beguf demalka. Now that the animal soul has been somewhat tamed, or subdued, or even affected and stimulated, so it's no longer an impediment. So now in the Shema, you can have the divine soul enter li'ishtaba beguf demalka, to unite with the guf of the Melech, shumakar cheitzva canal, which is the root of the nefesh al-kis. So the nefesh al-kis comes from Gufa de Malka. Like we learned earlier, the shadish of the Neshomos Israel is all the way up in the Etzem. The root of the animal soul comes from the worlds of, he's saying Asiyah here, Merkavah. And since the soul has entered into the body with the animal soul, and that will stop you, the divine soul, from accessing its source. So first you have to deal with the animal soul and address its needs, so to speak. And once you do that, you then can have the divine soul emerge by Shema and connect to the higher level. So that's one thing that the malachim do. That's why we mentioned the malachim. So this is more than what we learned earlier. That's just the processing. That's what he's going to say afterwards. That the malachim are basically there to deal with the animal soul. In other words, you have to speak on the terms of the animal soul, and Shema can't do that because Shema is a high level of yichud. Have to do that through the levels that relate to them, and the malachim can relate to the different middays because they're the root of the different emotions and different attributes of the animal soul.
Can you take a question?
1 minute. I think I'm going to stop here, even though it's not the end of the paragraph, because the next piece is going to go back that the malachim play another role, and that is the digestive process, the processing of the Aveda. But that we'll learn tomorrow. So I'm going to stop here by the period, and I'll take any questions, and then we'll finish here.
So this last part that we read, that we have the bracha on the relating to the angels, Yotzer, relating to the malachim, in order to, if you will, I'm paraphrasing, stimulate or even subdue both the nefesh behema, because that's its source. So basically, you're reminding nefesh behema that it too has a divine source. May not feel like it because it's a body, and its source is actually pretty low, if you will, in the state of Rishtalshalus, like you're saying, Noga de Asiyah. But nevertheless, you're saying, hey, you have to get involved in this too, or you have to get out of the way, because you also have a divine root. This is not about you. This is about Elokus. Is that a fair paraphrase of what he's trying to say here?
I wouldn't phrase it exactly like that. I was going to explain this. I'm going to explain what it means, because he doesn't explain what is how you make that hazaza in the animal soul. I was going to explain it with an example and a story and so on. What you say is partially correct, but it's a bigger picture than that.
Okay.
So are the Pnei Shor, Arya, and the Nesher, are they? But those are like on a superficial. Those are really malachim that are dressed up in that level. They are malachim. These three spiritual entities are called malachim.
That's what it looks like. He says here, because he says, let's see, what is the exact language? He says, yeah, Pnei Aryeh Pnei Shehena Malachim Asiyah. Yeah, that the four images in the Merkavah, if I recall correctly, they evolve. They are they become the Malachim. Here he says in Asiyah, they're the Malachim in Asiyah. I have to look up what it means in Bria and Yetzirah. But he's talking Asiyah here. He says clearly, they're Shein HaMalachim, yeah. Remember, a malach simply means a spiritual agent, spiritual expression. It's a spiritual channel. That's what ultimately what a malach is. So, if you maybe recall, he spoke earlier about malachim. If you remember, he said there are different types of malachim. Some that are called the innards. I'm looking on bottom of page 1425. It said malachim chinas raglayim, yidei adam, and there's malachim that are called kravayim. Yeah. So the Merkavah are basically dimensions of the divine as they're manifesting in different channels. So higher than Bria, as I said, you don't yet have those channels in that sense. There, everything is divine. You speak about Zah, Malchus, Chachma, Bina, the 10 spheres. The Merkavah begins to develop in Bria, Yetzirah, and then Asiyah. And that's also with the Malachim. That's basically the divine now channeling into particular, not just structures, but also that will manifest ultimately in the animal soul and its different midas. Remember, the animal soul's midas are chesed, gvura, teferes, netzach, chayid, yesod, and malchus. So where's that? What is that? That's the root of the different faces that he's talking about, and the root also of the different angels. So the angels are essentially like interfaces, or we talked about ambassadors, mailmen, delivery, that channel this into the animal soul. I'll say one thing regarding Yitzchak's question, just to make it a little more understand what's going on here. So what does it mean to get the Nefesh Abamis stimulated? Because he said these words, Nefesh Abamis Merkavah Menas. So you have to first be Me'ir Ava V'Yira in the animal soul. How do you Me'ir Ava and Yira in an animal soul that is interested in its own selfish needs? If you look in Tanya, it appears that the animal soul is actually, you're not speaking to the animal soul. You speak to the divine soul, Moyach Shalat Alalev, that has the ability to control the animal soul. But here he's speaking about actually speaking to the animal soul and getting the animal soul itself to be awakened with love and reverence. How do you do that on a practical level? That's like the obvious question here. So the answer I'll give is the following. There are many answers. Remember that in Shema, when we say b'chol levavcha, we say b'shnei yitzarecha. Why levavcha, not lipcha? Not just with your heart, but levavcha with two bays, because both sides of the heart. B'shnei yitzarecha, with the yetzer tov and the yetzer hara. So how do you get a yetzer hara that's designed specifically to be selfish, to suddenly think about the Ava V'Yira? So what he's saying here is you need to invoke it through the malachim, the root of the Nefesh Abamis. But what does that mean practically? So I'll share this. This is one of the powerful examples given by the Baal Shem Tov. I mentioned a number of times. I use it a lot. It's very, very, very fitting. It really helps explain a lot of things. It's actually, the Baal Shem Tov gave this example to explain why Chassidim say l'chaim. No, serve Hashem. Why are you saying l'chaim? Why do you need to have vodka? Say l'chaim. So, but you can broaden the question to this. Why in Judaism, the first thing that comes to mind in Judaism, ask a person of the street, is food, right? There's Shabbos food, there's Pesach food, there's Shavuos food, there's Hanukkah food, there's latkes and blintzes and kishke and kugel and, Jewish food. What does that have to do with God? What does it have to do with spirituality? So the Baal Shem Tov gave a beautiful example, briefly, that a king who wanted his son to inherit his throne, but realizes that his child grew up in a very entitled state of mind, because he's always been catered to and taken care of and spoiled in the palace. So the king decides for his son to really earn his way and to really become sensitive and a true compassionate leader, he needs to send him away from the palace to live among his future subjects. So as painful as it is, he tells his son, we'll send you to a distant land. No one will know who you are. You won't be treated in any special treatment. You have to make your way. Learn the ways of the world. And then when you learn the ways of the people, you can come back and you will become the next king. You'll lead them with the right, proper sensitivity, not like from an ivory tower, but because you lived among them. So the king says to his son, it's sad. It's not like I want to do this, but it's necessary. But I will send you, because after a while you'll get used to your ways there and you may forget where you're coming from. So I will send you a letter several times a year to remind you why you were sent and what your purpose is and who I am, your father, and that one day you're being groomed to be a king, and so on. Okay, Kachava, that's what happens. The day comes, they bid farewell, the child goes off, the son goes off, lives in some city, and has to make his way. It's not easy, because nobody's giving him any special privileges, there's no entitlement, nothing. And yes, in time he begins to make it, but he slowly forgets where he came from. But as his father promised, he gets the letter several times a year. Every time he receives the letter, he reminds himself where he comes from, and he wants to celebrate, but there's a problem. How's he going to celebrate? There's a whole town around him. What is he going to tell them? That I'm the king's son, that one day I'm going to be your leader? They'll either think he's crazy or they'll be resentful. So he comes up with a great idea. He says, he throws a party, free cocktails, free party on me. Everybody comes, they celebrate, they eat, they drink, they dance. They're celebrating because they got a beautiful meal. Meanwhile, he's celebrating with them, but he's celebrating because he received a letter from his father. So the Baal Shem Tov says, the king, of course, is Hashem. The neshama is the child that's sent to this world. Because when we live in Gan Eden, in the spiritual environment, everything's comfortable. Everything is easy. There are no challenges. You're living, basking in the glow of Ziv HaShechina, divine revelation, divine consciousness. You have to earn your way. So he sends a neshama down lamata, makes it forget what it knows from above. When we're born, we're made to forget the whole Torah that we're taught in our mother's womb. And consciously, we're not aware, and we have to make our own way. But Hashem says, I don't leave you alone. I will send you a Shabbos, a Yom Tov, many opportunities. This is my letter to you, to remind you who you are. You're my child. You're my neshama. And when the child, when we receive the letter, we want to celebrate. The problem is the body and the animal soul are not interested in divine messages. So what you do is, Hashem says, feed it, give it good food on Shabbos and good drink, and let it sleep a little longer. Feed the Nefesh Habamis on its terms, that it should appreciate on its terms. Because Nefesh Habamis, if you tell the Nefesh Habamis, I have a spiritual message from heaven, doesn't know what you're talking about. So feed it on its terms, so it will say, getting good food. It's enjoyable. Obviously kosher and all that. But the animal soul can appreciate it, and it'll celebrate with you while you are celebrating the real reason, because it's coming from the divine source. So basically what he's saying is that when we educate our children or ourselves, and we reward someone and say, if you study well, I'll give you a candy or a toy, or for someone older, a different type of reward. These rewards are on our terms, that we should appreciate something that we don't yet appreciate its pure spirituality. So we have to find a way to explain it. The Nefesh Habamis is why it's good for you to learn Chassidus. It's enjoyable, makes you understand who you are. So find a language. That's essentially what it means, that when you're invoking the Malachim, what you're doing is speaking to the language of the animal soul on its terms, that it should appreciate, that it should have also an ava to something that's spiritual. Whatever way, whatever will speak to it. Whereas the Nefesh Elikis in Shema, the next step, Nefesh Elikis doesn't need material incentives. The Nefesh Elikis appreciates the letter on its own, but it has to contend with the animal soul. This is one way of explaining. It's not the only way, but it's one way of explaining. And this is the Aveda, how we explain to the animal soul, and how do we penetrate it, like you said, pierce it, chisel into its very psyche, that it should also appreciate Ava V'yir on its terms. So that's a part of the explanation. Okay.
I like those. Thank you.
But in this mashal or whatever, the prince isn't explaining to the guys that are saying l'chaim and eating the beef, enjoying the simcha, while he's reveling in the fact that he got a message from the king. He's not trying to explain to, or is he? He's trying to explain to them while they're drinking the l'chaims, and the Nefesh Bahamas is eating the freshen at the Farbrengen table, the cholent or whatever. He's also he does explain to them that really this is a celebration for godliness.
If you can, great. If you can't, you can't. Not necessarily. Some people only come for the Kiddush.
So what's accomplished?
That they're celebrating on Shabbos.
For the
Like
wrong
having
purpose.
someone come to your Shabbos table and they're coming for the good meal. They're also keeping Shabbos.
They're keeping Shabbos. Okay.
And then in turn, with time, you could explain more. I mean, if you say a Vort Chassidus when they're eating a good dinner,
Right.
and it penetrates their animal soul, then you've continued. It's a warming process. It's a cultivation process.
Got you.
But this language here seems to be talking about a spiritual stimulation. It doesn't. It seems to be not relating to the body on its material terms, but in some sense trying to relate to the body in some spiritual sense. I mean, that's how I'm reading this.
Well, physical pleasure in food is also a manifestation of spiritual pleasure. The animal soul may not know that yet. The bottom line is, it's just on each person's terms. That's what it really means. Now, if you could, as I just said, also, I'm trying to make it very practical, something that works for all of us. If you could, on higher levels, of course, you can also teach the animal soul to begin to love as well and revere the divine, because it's its source, it sustains you, like we've learned. It's good for you, good for your health. Today, for example, gratitude and other kindness is also good for the animal soul's welfare. Whatever it takes. I'm just giving examples of how you actually implement it. What are you doing? You're essentially taking from Seder Shtalshel itself, from the root, which is like the Malachim. What I explained now is a little Chassidus applied. Let's put it that way. If you go purely what it says here, essentially he's very brief. He's saying that in order to stimulate the Aviyah and Nefesh Abamis, you have to draw from the Malachim. So I'm trying to explain it in terms that we can relate to.
Understood.
One more question from me, if you could.
As I said, there could be other explanations. I'm just giving one that makes it a little more practical that we can all apply.
When it says that Panei Adam Bar Basan, that as you said, that the three sides of the chariot are the animals. They also have a part of a human face in them. Would you say that would be, those three are basically midos, the nesher and the ox, but they have the aspect of the intellectual side of them, the seichel sheba midos.
Yeah, most likely yes. Yeah, most likely yes. Okay, I'm going to stop here. Almost to the end of the paragraph on page 1444.